Hello everyone, my name is Audrey Blackwood, and I'm 32 years old. For most of my life, my entire world has revolved around the elegant, intricate, and often forgotten world of historical cartography. My family, the Blackwoods, are titans of industry, real estate developers who see the world in square footage and profit margins. They always said my love for old maps was a childish, useless hobby. They had no idea that this very hobby was about to cost them their entire fortune and, in the most deliciously ironic twist of fate, hand me my wildest dream on a silver platter. My family thought they were building a condo empire on a piece of woodland I cherished. They never bothered to read the fine print of history, the kind of print only I knew how to find. What they didn't know was that their multi-million-dollar project was already dead before they even broke ground, and I was the one holding the shovel to bury it. Before I get into how I turned their calculated greed into a conservationist's paradise, a story of quiet research and perfectly timed revenge, I'd love to know where all of you are watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever had a passion that someone close to you just refused to understand or respect, go ahead and hit that like button because I have a feeling this story will resonate with you. And for any new viewers, make sure you subscribe to join our community of storytellers. You won't want to miss what comes next. Now let's get into how one woman's obsession with old paper brought a modern real estate dynasty to its knees. My family operated on a simple, brutal principle. The past was an obstacle. It was something to be demolished, paved over, and forgotten, replaced by the gleaming, sterile promise of the future as envisioned by Blackwood Development. Our family dinners were less about connection and more like quarterly board meetings where my father, Richard, and my older brother, Ethan, would hold court. They spoke a language I found alienating, a dialect of acquisitions, zoning variances, and return on investment. My mother, Eleanor, was their polished, smiling echo, a woman who measured success in curb appeal and the envy of her social circle. And then there was me, Audrey the archivist, the girl who preferred the smell of decaying parchment to the smell of new construction. I remember one Sunday dinner with agonizing clarity. It was a week after I had spent a significant portion of my meager savings, earned from doing freelance historical research for authors and academics, on a hand-drawn 1874 map of our county. It was a beautiful thing, detailed with spidery ink, showing property lines that had long since vanished and trails that were now just ghost impressions in the woods. I brought it to show them, naively hoping for the 1000th time that they might see the value in my world. I unrolled it carefully on the edge of the mahogany dining table, the antique paper crinkling like autumn leaves. "Look what I found," I said, my voice full of a reverence they could never comprehend. "This is one of the first detailed surveys of the region. It shows the original homesteads, the old logging paths." Ethan, ever the pragmatist, didn't even glance down. He was swirling a glass of expensive red wine, a smirk playing on his lips. "Still playing with your doodles, Audrey? I swear, you're the only 32-year-old I know whose prized possessions are pieces of old paper. When are you going to join the real world and help us make some actual money?" My father chuckled, a low, dismissive sound that always made me feel about 10 years old. "Son, be nice. Your sister has her interests." He finally looked at the map, his eyes scanning it not with curiosity, but with a developer's cold assessment. "Land is for building on, Audrey, not for staring at. This right here," he tapped a large, green-tinted area on the map, "that's just unrealized potential. Wasted space." The spot he had tapped was the Miller Tract. My heart clenched. "It's not wasted space, Dad," I argued, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "It's a mature hardwood forest. It's one of the last undeveloped parcels of its kind this close to the city. It has a story." "Stories don't pay property taxes," Ethan quipped, taking a large bite of his steak. "But a luxury condo complex with a golf course sure as hell does. We could put 300 units on a plot that size. Maybe more." My mother, sensing the familiar tension, stepped in with her usual brand of placating dismissal. Now, let's not talk business at the table. Audrey dear, it's a lovely map. Very quaint. But Ethan has a point. It's just not a practical passion, is it? You're so intelligent. You could be managing our commercial properties by now." "This is practical," I insisted, my frustration bubbling up. "Understanding the history of a place, how it was used, what it meant to people, that has value." Richard sighed, leaning back in his chair, the patriarch delivering his final verdict. "The only value in a piece of land, Audrey, is the value you can build on top of it. Everything else is just sentiment, and sentiment is a liability in our business." He turned back to Ethan, and just like that, I was invisible again. They started discussing a new project, something about bulldozing a row of pre-war craftsman homes to make way for a strip mall. I quietly rolled up my precious map, the ink a blur through the tears I refused to let them see. I felt it again, that familiar, crushing weight of being the family's strange, disappointing outlier. They didn't just disagree with my passion, they fundamentally disdained the very lens through which I saw the world. To them, the Miller Tract was just an abstract patch of green on a map, a future conquest. To me, it was a sanctuary. After that disastrous dinner, I couldn't stand the sterile, air-conditioned atmosphere of the Blackwood mansion a moment longer. I got in my car and drove, the rolled-up map a silent passenger on the seat beside me. I didn't have a destination in mind, but my car seemed to know where I needed to go. I ended up on the winding country road that bordered the northern edge of the Miller Tract, pulling over onto the gravel shoulder. I got out and just breathed. The air here was different, thick with the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and decaying leaves. It was the smell of life, of cycles, of time itself. The forest stood as a dense, dark wall of green and brown, a living cathedral of oak, maple, and hickory. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in shifting, dappled columns, illuminating ferns and mossy logs on the forest floor. It was a place of profound peace, a stark contrast to the sharp angles and cold glass of my family's world. My connection to this land ran deeper than simple appreciation. It was woven into the very fabric of my being, a legacy from the one person in my life who had ever truly understood me. My maternal grandfather, Thomas. He wasn't a Blackwood, not by blood or by spirit. He had been a history teacher, a man with kind eyes and calloused hands from a lifetime of gardening. He passed away when I was 16, but his influence was the bedrock of my life. I closed my eyes, and I could almost feel the memory rising. I was 8 years old, my small hand lost in his large, warm one as he led me into this very forest. He wasn't showing me trees, he was showing me signatures. "Look here, Audrey," he'd said, his voice a gentle rumble. He pointed to a faint, overgrown rut in the ground. "This looks like just a dip in the dirt, doesn't it? But if you know what you're looking for, you can see it's an old wagon road. See how the trees on either side are a little younger? This was a highway 150 years ago." He had given me my first compass that day, a heavy brass instrument that felt like a sacred object in my hands. "A map gives you the lines," he told me, "but the land gives you the story. You just have to learn to read it." He taught me how to identify the rock walls that marked the boundaries of long-forgotten farms, how to spot the clusters of non-native apple trees that signaled an old homestead, how to see the landscape not as a static picture, but as a living document, written and rewritten over centuries. The Miller Tract was his favorite chapter. He was the one who first told me about the Miller family, who had owned the land for generations before falling on hard times and selling it to a timber company that, thankfully, went bankrupt before they could clear-cut it. For years, preserving this place had been more than a dream. It was a mission. Back at my small apartment, I had a binder 3 inches thick, its label neatly printed. The Miller Tract Preservation Project. It was filled with everything: topographical surveys I'd commissioned myself, biodiversity reports I'd compiled with the help of a retired botany professor, grant applications I'd filled out and filed away, and sketches I'd made of walking trails, a small nature center, and educational plaques. My plan was to form a small, dedicated nonprofit, to start a grassroots fundraising campaign, and to one day, somehow, scrape together enough money to buy the tract and protect it forever, turning it into a public historical park. My family saw it as a fantasy. I saw it as my life's work. Standing there on the edge of the woods, the sting of their mockery still fresh, I felt a surge of defiant determination. They could have their world of concrete and steel. I would save this one. I had to. Weeks turned into a couple of months. I threw myself into my freelance work, taking on more research projects, saving every penny I could. I was trying to build my preservation fund, a process that felt impossibly slow, like trying to fill an ocean with a teaspoon. I deliberately kept my distance from my family, avoiding the Sunday dinners and making excuses whenever my mother called. The wound from their casual dismissal was still raw, and I needed space to nurse it. I told myself their opinions didn't matter, but the truth was a part of me, a small, hopeful, foolish part, still craved their approval. That foolish part was the reason I found myself at the gleaming, ostentatious headquarters of Blackwood Development on a Tuesday afternoon. It was my father's birthday, and despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to just ignore it. I had found a beautiful leather-bound first edition of a biography about his favorite architect, a peace offering of sorts. A way of saying, I see you, even if you don't see me. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and glass, a monument to my family's success. The receptionist, a woman I'd known since I was a teenager, gave me a warm smile and waved me through. They're all in a meeting, Audrey, but your father's office is unlocked. You can just leave it on his desk. I thanked her and made my way down the hushed, carpeted hallway. The walls were lined with framed photographs of their proudest achievements. Soaring skyscrapers, sprawling suburban communities, glossy shopping malls. It was like a museum of everything I stood against. As I approached my father's corner office, I saw that the door to my brother's adjacent office was ajar. Ethan was on the phone, his back to me, pacing in front of the massive window that overlooked the city. He was a quintessential Blackwood, tall, impeccably dressed, and radiating an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence. He was also loud. Henderson, relax, he was saying, his voice booming with arrogant assurance. The financing is solid. We're closing in 3 weeks. I paused, my hand on the doorknob of my father's office. I shouldn't listen. It was a business call. It was private. But something in his tone, a note of smug triumph, made me freeze. Yeah, the old Miller estate finally listed, he continued, and my blood ran cold. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The holding company that had it finally folded. We got the tip from our guy in the county planning office before it even hit the market. A quiet, off-market deal. It's a gold mine. He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. No competition. I heard some small-time greenies were sniffing around, trying to get donations to save the stupid trees, but they can't match our all-cash offer. We're paying top dollar to expedite the sale. My hand trembled. The small-time greenies. He was talking about me. About my dream. My carefully crafted plans, my binder, my hope. Then came the final, devastating blow. Best part, Ethan said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial, gloating tone. Little sister Audrey has been mooning over that patch of dirt for years. Thinks it's some kind of magical fairyland. This will finally show her what land is really for. We'll even name a cul-de-sac after her. Audrey's Folly. It'll be hilarious. The gift-wrapped book slipped from my grasp, hitting the plush carpet with a soft, sickening thud. I felt the air leave my lungs, as if I'd been physically punched in the gut. It wasn't just business. It wasn't that they were ignorant of my dream. They were actively, maliciously targeting it. They knew what the Miller Tract meant to me, and they were taking it, not just for profit, but for the sheer, cruel pleasure of crushing my spirit. It was a power play, a message. Your world is meaningless. Our world is the only one that's real. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I backed away from the door, my movements numb and robotic. I couldn't breathe. The polished marble, the framed pictures, the silent, imposing building. It all felt like it was closing in on me, suffocating me. I stumbled back the way I came, past the smiling receptionist who was thankfully on another call, and burst out of the glass doors into the afternoon sun, gulping for air. I had walked in there hoping for a sliver of connection, a moment of peace. I walked out with the shrapnel of their betrayal embedded in my heart. The gift for my father lay forgotten on the floor outside his office. Our relationship, I knew in that moment, lay there with it. For the next week, I was a ghost. I didn't leave my small apartment. I unplugged my phone, letting the calls from my mother, father, and brother go straight to a voicemail box I had no intention of checking. The curtains stayed drawn. The world outside felt too bright, too loud, too full of a life I no longer felt a part of. The betrayal had hollowed me out, leaving behind a raw, aching void. My binder, the Miller Tract Preservation Project, sat on my coffee table like a tombstone. Every page, every note, every carefully drawn sketch was a monument to my own foolishness. I had poured my heart into a dream that my own family had viewed as a joke, a weakness to be exploited. Ethan's words echoed in my mind on a relentless loop. Little sister Audrey, mooning over that patch of dirt. Audrey's Folly. The casual cruelty of it was a special kind of poison. It wasn't enough to win. They had to make sure I knew I had lost, and that my loss was their amusement. I spent hours just staring at the wall, a teacup growing cold in my hands. Despair was a thick, heavy blanket, and I was suffocating under its weight. What was the point of my passion? What was the point of my knowledge? It was all just paper. Doodles. Useless against the raw, brute force of their money and influence. I was David, but Goliath had already won before I even knew there was a fight. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself sitting on the floor of my living room, the contents of my project binder spread around me. It was a kind of self-flagellation, forcing myself to look at the wreckage of my hopes. My eyes landed on the oldest map in my collection, the very one I'd tried to show them at that Sunday dinner. It was a copy of the 1874 survey, but the original it was based on was even older. It was the map my grandfather, Thomas, had given me. He had found it folded inside an old book at a flea market. It was fragile, the paper yellowed and brittle at the creases. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the familiar, spidery lines. I had studied this map 100 times. I knew every contour line, every faded property boundary, every symbol. But in the dim light of my apartment, my eyes raw from crying, I saw something I had always missed. It was a tiny, almost illegible annotation near the southern boundary of what was marked as the Miller homestead. It was written in a different, fainter ink, as if added later. I had always dismissed it as a smudge, a bit of foxing on the old paper. But now, in my state of hyper-focused misery, I saw it wasn't a smudge. It was writing. I grabbed the magnifying glass I kept for detailed cartographic work and held it over the spot. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just a scribble. It was a sequence of letters and a number. MH number 3 Covenant. My mind, sluggish from days of grief, slowly began to churn. Covenant. The word jolted me. A covenant was a formal agreement, a promise, often a legal one. But what was MH? My first thought was Miller Homestead, but that didn't feel right. MH number 3? That implied a number 1 and a number 2. It was a series. It was a clue. A tiny, fragile flicker of something I hadn't felt in days ignited in the hollow space in my chest. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something more primal. It was defiance. My family had beaten me with money and power. They thought my world of old paper and forgotten stories was weak. But what if it wasn't? What if, buried in the very history they disdained, was a weapon they could never have anticipated? In that moment, sitting on the floor surrounded by the ghosts of my dead dream, I made a decision. I could either let them crush me, or I could fight back with the only tools I had. I chose to fight. The hunt was on. The next morning, I was a different person. The grief was still there, a cold stone in my stomach, but it was now overlaid with a sharp, clear sense of purpose. I packed a bag with my map, my magnifying glass, several notebooks, and a thermos of strong black coffee. My destination was the one place in the world I knew might hold the answers: the county records office. It was a grim, imposing granite building downtown, a place most people avoided. To me, it was a treasure chest. The basement archives were exactly as I remembered them from past research trips, a labyrinth of rolling metal shelves, smelling of dust, decaying paper, and time itself. The air was cool and still. It was a necropolis of forgotten facts, and I was there to resurrect one. I was greeted by the archive's gatekeeper, a man named Mr. Abernathy. He was in his late 60s, with a fringe of white hair, thick glasses, and a permanently skeptical expression. He wore the same gray cardigan every time I saw him. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "What forgotten battle are we fighting today?" "A covenant, Mr. Abernathy," I said, getting straight to the point. I showed him the annotation on my map. From the late 1800s. It references something called MH number 3, and it's located on the old Miller homestead property. He peered at it through his glasses, his lips pursed. "MHHM. Never heard of it. Covenants from that era are a nightmare. Most were never properly filed with the county, just handshake agreements. And if they were filed by tract and parcel numbers that haven't been valid in a century. It's a needle in a haystack made of other needles." "I have to try," I said, my voice firm. He sighed, a long-suffering sound. "The property ledgers from 1870 to 1900 are over there." He gestured with a thumb towards a dark, forbidding corner of the basement. "Good luck. Don't get lost." For 3 days I lived in that basement. I pulled down massive leather-bound ledgers, the pages filled with elegant, looping cursive that was a challenge to decipher. I sneezed from the dust. My fingers were stained with ink and grime. I cross-referenced the Miller homestead's 19th century parcel number with every entry I could find, looking for any mention of a covenant, an easement, or the initials MH. It was grueling, tedious work. I found mortgages, tax payments, and land transfers. I found nothing. By the end of the 3rd day, my hope was beginning to fray. Mr. Abernathy found me slumped over a ledger, my head in my hands. He silently placed a cup of what smelled like vending machine coffee on the table beside me. "Nothing, I take it?" he asked, his tone a little less crusty than usual. "Nothing," I admitted, my voice hoarse. Maybe you were right. Maybe it's a ghost. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the old map I had pinned to a corkboard. MH, he murmured, tapping his chin. You know, it reminds me of something. My great-uncle was part of the Grand Army of the Republic, the Union Veterans Association. After the Civil War, they put up memorials all over the county. Small ones, not big statues. Sometimes just a stone or a plaque. They called them memorial halts. My head snapped up. Memorial halts. MH. They made agreements with landowners, he continued, his eyes distant with memory, to place these markers along old walking paths, creating pilgrimage trails to honor their fallen comrades. Most of them are gone now, or on private land, completely forgotten. A jolt went through me, pure adrenaline. Mr. Abernathy, where would the records for something like that be? It wouldn't be in the property ledgers, he said, a spark of interest in his own eyes now. It would have been considered a private memorial, not a property lien. You'd need to look in the miscellaneous filings. It's a dumping ground for everything that doesn't fit a category. Wills, private contracts, club charters. It's a mess. No one's properly indexed it since the 1950s. He led me to another section of the archives, to a row of dusty, neglected file boxes. It took another full day of searching, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. And then, in a brittle manila folder tied with faded red string, I found it. It was titled, Perpetual Conservation Easement and Memorial Covenant between the Miller Family and the GAR Post 47. The date was May 30th, 1889. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read it. The document, written in dense, legalistic script, granted the Veterans Association and their successors the right to maintain a historical trail across the Miller property in perpetuity. It was created to connect 3 specific granite markers, Memorial Halts 1, 2, and 3, which honored 3 local soldiers who had died at the Battle of Antietam. And then I saw the sentence that made the entire world stop. Furthermore, I read, my voice a whisper in the silent archive, the grantor, the Miller family, and their heirs and assigns do covenant and agree to forbid any and all permanent structures, earth-moving activities, or felling of timber within a corridor extending 25 feet to either side of the center line of said memorial trail. It was a 50-foot-wide protected corridor, running directly through the heart of the property. A legal barrier, over a century old, that had been sleeping in this folder, waiting. It was a ghost, all right. A ghost with teeth. It had been misfiled under G for GAR instead of M for Miller, and because it wasn't a financial lien, it had never been flagged in a standard title search. It was a landmine of paper and ink, and my family was about to step right on it. I looked up at Mr. Abernathy, who had been watching me, a slow grin spreading across his face. Well, I'll be, he said softly. You found it. The discovery of the covenant was just the first step. A dusty, 130-year-old document was one thing. Making it an unbreachable legal fortress was another. I knew I couldn't do this alone. My first call was to a former professor of mine from university, an expert in environmental law. She listened to my breathless story and gave me the name of a lawyer. Her name is Sarah Jenkins, my professor said. She's young, she's brilliant, and she lives to take on Goliath. She works pro bono for cases like this. Tell her I sent you. I met Sarah in her small, cluttered office above a bookstore. She was sharp, focused, and had an energy that was both calming and invigorating. She examined the covenant with the precision of a surgeon. This is incredible, Audrey, she said, her eyes alight. It's ironclad on its face. The language, perpetuity, heirs and assigns, it's exactly what we want to see. But there's a process. A long, frustrating process. We need to get this document officially re-registered with the county, citing the original filing. Then the crucial part, we need the State Historical Preservation Office, or SHPO, to officially survey and verify the existence and location of the memorial halts. Once they're designated as protected state historical sites, this easement becomes untouchable. How long will that take? I asked, my heart sinking. Weeks. Maybe a month or 2 if we're lucky, she said, her expression serious. Bureaucracy isn't known for its speed. My family's purchase closes in 2 weeks, I said, the words tasting like ash. The sale will be final on the 15th. Sarah leaned forward, her gaze intense. Then we don't have a moment to waste. Get me high-resolution copies of everything. I'll start drafting the petitions. You, she said, pointing a pen at me. Your job is to find those markers. SHPO won't send a surveyor out on a wild goose chase. We need to give them precise locations. The next few days were a blur of frenetic activity. While Sarah battled with paperwork and navigated the labyrinth of county and state bureaucracy, I became a field operative. I spent every daylight hour in the Miller Tract, armed with my grandfather's compass, a GPS unit, and copies of the old maps. The forest that had once been my sanctuary was now a grid to be searched. I fought through thorny underbrush, waded through streams, and got covered in mud and mosquito bites. I found the first marker, MH number 1, near the southern edge of the property, half swallowed by the roots of an ancient oak tree. It was a simple, rough-hewn granite post, about 3 feet high, the initials MH and the number 1 barely visible beneath a thick coat of moss. Seeing it touching its cool, solid surface made it all real. I wasn't chasing a ghost anymore. Finding the second one was harder, but I eventually located it deep in a ravine. The third, the one mentioned on my map, was the most difficult. It was supposed to be near the northern boundary, but the landscape had changed. After 2 days of fruitless searching, I was about to give up when I stumbled quite literally over it. It was lying on its side, almost completely buried in a century of leaf litter. My hands trembled as I cleared the dirt away. MH number 3. I had them. All 3 pillars of my legal argument. The tension mounted with every passing day. Sarah was a miracle worker, calling in favors, pushing paperwork, and charming and intimidating clerks in equal measure. We got the petition refiled. We submitted my GPS coordinates to SHPO. We waited. The silence was deafening. My family's closing date loomed, a black X on my calendar. One evening, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. My stomach lurched. I hadn't spoken to any of them since the day I'd overheard his call. I let it go to voicemail, but he immediately called back. My finger hovered over the ignore button, but a voice in my head, Sarah's voice, told me to answer. Don't give them any reason to be suspicious. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello, Audrey? Finally. Ethan's voice was a mix of annoyance and feigned concern. Where have you been? Dad's been worried sick about you. We all have. I've been busy, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. A research trip. A research trip? Right, he said, the condescension dripping from his words. Look, are you moping about the Miller land? I heard you were asking around about it. If you are, just don't. It's a done deal. We can talk about it after we close next Friday. Maybe we can find a spot for one of your little plaques, somewhere near the parking garage. The urge to scream at him, to tell him exactly what I was doing, was immense. But I swallowed it, choking back the rage. I'm fine, Ethan. Just working. I have to go. I hung up, my hand shaking. Parking garage. The sheer, smug arrogance of it. It was the fuel I needed. The next afternoon, I got an email from Sarah. The subject line was a single word. Approved. I opened it. It was a scanned letter from the State Historical Preservation Office. The survey was complete. The markers were verified. The memorial trail and its protective easement were now officially recognized and protected under state law. The date on the letter was the 12th. My family was closing on the 15th. They were about to pay millions of dollars for a developer's graveyard. The trap was set. And it was perfect. The invitation arrived 2 days after the sale closed. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock embossed with a gaudy gold logo. Blackwood Vistas. My family, never ones for subtlety, were throwing a lavish party to celebrate their acquisition and to woo potential investors for the condo project. It was being held at the Pinnacle, a ridiculously expensive restaurant on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper, a place known for its panoramic views and microscopic portions. My name was on the invitation, a clear, deliberate twist of the knife. They didn't just want to beat me. They wanted me to watch them celebrate on the grave of my dream. They expected me to be a sad, defeated little figure in the corner, a testament to their victory. They had no idea I was about to be the guest of honor at their public execution. For a moment, I considered just letting them find out from a lawyer's letter. But that wasn't enough. After a lifetime of being dismissed, of having my passion belittled and my dreams trampled, I needed to see their faces. I needed to be the one to deliver the news. This wasn't just about the land anymore. This was about me. I called Sarah. The party's on Saturday. I'm going. Audrey, are you sure? She asked, a note of caution in her voice. It's going to be a bloodbath. I'm sure, I said. And I'm not going alone. Can you be there? Wild horses couldn't drag me away, she replied instantly. Then I made one more call, to a man named Arthur Henderson. He was the elderly, deeply respected director of the Woodland Preservation Trust, the largest and most influential conservation group in the state. I had met him once years ago when I'd first started my research. He had been kind and encouraging. I told him the whole story. He was silent for a long moment when I finished. Then he said, "Miss Blackwood, it would be my profound honor to accompany you. What time should I be ready?" On Saturday night, I took my time getting ready. I chose a simple dark blue dress, professional, understated, and elegant. It was armor. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the mousy, insecure girl from the family dinners. I saw a woman who knew a secret, a woman who held a lightning bolt in her hands and was just waiting for the right moment to let it fly. Sarah and Mr. Henderson met me in the lobby of the restaurant. Sarah looked sharp and formidable in a dark pantsuit. Mr. Henderson, with his shock of white hair and distinguished bearing, radiated a quiet authority that could silence a room. We were an unlikely trio, but we were a united front. "Ready?" Sarah asked, giving my arm a squeeze. "Ready," I said, and we stepped into the elevator. The party was in full swing. The room was packed with the city's elite, bankers, politicians, and wealthy investors, all sipping champagne and making deals. My family was at the center of it all, glowing with triumph. My father was holding court, my mother was gliding through the crowd like a queen, and Ethan was standing beside a massive, illuminated architectural model of the Blackwood vistas, his chest puffed out with pride. My mother saw me first. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second as she took in my companions, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Audrey, darling, you came, and you brought guests." "Mom, you know Sarah Jenkins, my lawyer," I said calmly. "And this is Arthur Henderson from the Woodland Preservation Trust." My father and Ethan turned at the sound of Mr. Henderson's name. A murmur went through the nearby crowd. Henderson was a local legend, a man who had successfully fought developers for 40 years. His presence here was an anomaly, a question mark in a room full of exclamation points. "Audrey, what is this?" my father said, his voice low and tight, the jovial host facade cracking. "This is a private event." "Mr. Blackwood," Mr. Henderson said, his voice calm and clear, extending a hand my father was forced to shake. "A beautiful view from up here. A shame to spoil it." Before my father could respond, Ethan stepped forward, his eyes flashing with anger. "What are you doing here, Audrey? Trying to cause a scene? Trying to embarrass us because you're a sore loser? It's pathetic." "On the contrary, Ethan," I said, my voice steady, my heart hammering. "I'm here to prevent you from embarrassing yourselves even further." Just then, my father tapped a glass for attention. It was time for the main event. He launched into a grand, self-congratulatory speech, his voice booming across the silent room. He spoke of vision, of progress, of turning a forgotten, overgrown plot of land into a vibrant community of the future. He gestured dramatically towards the architectural model, a miniature city of condos, tennis courts, and pristine swimming pools. The investors applauded enthusiastically. Ethan shot me a triumphant, pitying smirk. When the applause died down, I made my move. I walked calmly to the front of the room, standing beside my father near the model. The entire room was watching me. "Dad, Ethan," I began, my voice clear and carrying in the sudden hush. "A wonderful speech. A beautiful vision. Before your investors sign their final checks, however, there's a slight issue with your due diligence that you seem to have overlooked." I placed a simple manila folder on the table next to the model. Richard scoffed, trying to laugh it off. "Audrey, please, not now. This isn't the time for your little hobbies." "This isn't a hobby, Dad," I said. I opened the folder. This is a legal document. It's a copy of a perpetual conservation easement, filed in 1889, and officially re-registered and verified by the State Historical Preservation Office 3 days before you closed your sale. A wave of whispers rippled through the room. Ethan's face went white. "It establishes a 50-foot-wide protected corridor that runs directly through the center of your proposed development," I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. "It connects 3 granite markers, which are now designated as protected state historical sites. The covenant, which is legally binding on you as the new owners, explicitly forbids any permanent structures, any felling of timber, and any earth-moving activities within that corridor." I looked from my father's stunned face to my brother's look of pure, horrified disbelief. "What is this nonsense?" my father stammered, grabbing the papers. "Some old piece of paper? It means nothing." Sarah stepped forward. "I assure you, Mr. Blackwood, it means everything," she said, her voice cutting through the air like glass. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm Miss Blackwood's legal counsel. You can try to fight it, but this covenant has survived for over 130 years. The state's Attorney General's office is now its guardian. Any attempt to disturb those markers is not a civil infraction. It is a felony, punishable by massive fines and prison time. The room erupted in a cacophony of panicked murmurs. I saw one of the lead investors, a man I recognized from the newspaper, grab his phone and walk briskly towards the exit. Another was having a hushed, frantic conversation with his own lawyer. Ethan finally found his voice, a strangled, furious cry. You did this. You sabotaged us. Your own family. I looked him directly in the eye, all the fear, all the hurt, all the years of being belittled falling away, replaced by a profound, unshakable calm. No, Ethan, I said, my voice quiet but heard by everyone. You did this to yourselves. You saw a balance sheet. I saw a story. It turns out, that story has legal standing. You bought a piece of land, but you never owned its history. I turned my back on them, on the shattered model of their greedy dream, on the chaos that was erupting around them. I walked over to Mr. Henderson, who was watching the Blackwoods with an expression of grim satisfaction. My father was staring at the documents as if they were a snake, his face a mask of gray, abject shock. My mother looked like she was about to faint. And Ethan was just staring at me, his arrogance finally, utterly shattered, replaced by the raw, impotent rage of a king who had just lost his kingdom. The party was over. The immediate aftermath was a tempest. My phone, which I had purposefully left on, began to detonate with a fusillade of calls and texts. I watched the screen light up with their names, father, mother, Ethan, and felt nothing but a distant clinical detachment. I was on the other side of a chasm now, and their frantic signals couldn't reach me. The first voicemail was from my father. It wasn't the voice of the confident patriarch. It was the enraged roar of a wounded animal. He bellowed about betrayal, about ingratitude, about how I had publicly humiliated him. He threatened to cut me off, to disown me, to make sure I never saw a single penny of the family's money, as if that was the only thing I could possibly care about. The next was from my mother. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, a tear-choked monologue about family loyalty and a mother's broken heart. How could you do this to your father, Audrey? After everything we've given you? You've ruined him. You've ruined us. Your brother, he can't even speak. Is this what you wanted? To tear your own family apart? Then came a single venomous text from Ethan. 7 words that dripped with a lifetime of resentment. I will never, ever forgive you. Following Sarah's earlier advice, I calmly blocked their numbers. I sent a short, polite email to my father's personal account. All future communications regarding the Miller Tract or any other family matters should be directed to my lawyer, Sarah Jenkins. Her contact information is attached. Then I turned off my phone. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of freedom. I felt a strange and dizzying cocktail of emotions. The electric thrill of victory, the sharp grief for a family that was now truly lost to me, and an overwhelming, profound sense of peace. The little girl who desperately wanted her father's approval was gone. The woman who had just defended her life's work had taken her place. It didn't take long for the story to leak. The headline in the local business journal was brutal. Blackwood Vista's fiasco, multi-million-dollar project derailed by century-old covenant. The article, quoting several anonymous but furious investors, detailed how Blackwood Development's shoddy due diligence had led them to purchase a functionally undevelopable property. My family's reputation, built over decades of ruthless efficiency, was in tatters. They were no longer seen as titans, they were seen as fools. Their world began to unravel. The investors, spooked by the legal quagmire and the public embarrassment, pulled out en masse. My father, I later learned from Sarah, had leveraged the company to the hilt to finance the all-cash purchase. So sure was he of a quick and massive return. Now they were stuck. They were hemorrhaging money, paying interest on a massive loan for a property that was, for their purposes, utterly worthless. They hired a team of high-priced lawyers to find a way out. They explored every angle, challenging the validity of the covenant, claiming it was abandoned, even arguing that the GAR no longer existed as a legal entity. But Sarah had anticipated every move. The covenant was tied to the markers themselves, now protected by the state. The Woodland Preservation Trust, as a historical and conservation group, was legally recognized as a successor in interest to the GAR's original intent. Every legal avenue was a dead end. Their lawyers told them they could fight it in court for years, spend millions in legal fees, and would, in all likelihood, still lose. Their desperation grew. They tried to sell the land on the open market, but the news of the ironclad easement was public record now. a permanent stain on the property's title. No developer would touch it. The only people who would possibly want a piece of land with a protected historical trail running through it were people like me. The Blackwoods were trapped, caught in a cage of their own making, and I was the one holding the key. One evening, about a week after the party, there was a frantic knocking at my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and my heart dropped. It was my mother. She looked awful. Her perfectly coiffed hair was a mess, her eyes were red and swollen, and her expensive clothes looked rumpled. She must have ambushed me, waiting for me to get home from a research trip to the library. I opened the door just a crack. "Mother, you shouldn't be here." "Audrey, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "You have to let me in. We need to talk." Against my better judgment, I let her in. This was the test. This was the boundary I had to hold face to face. She collapsed onto my sofa, sobbing. It was a dramatic, theatrical performance. "Your father, he's a broken man," she wept. "He hasn't slept. The bank is calling. Everything we've worked for is falling apart. And it's all because of you." I stood across the room, my arms crossed. I did not move to comfort her. "It's because of his greed," I said, my voice cold and even. "It's because he and Ethan deliberately tried to destroy something that was important to me. This is the consequence of their actions." "But we're your family," she cried, looking up at me, her face a mask of pleading. "Blood is thicker than water. You can fix this. Call off your lawyer. Tell the state it was all a mistake. There has to be a way." I looked at her, at this woman who had stood by silently for 30 years while my spirit was chipped away, and I felt a final, sad clarity. She didn't understand. She would never understand. She wasn't here because she was sorry. She was here because their world was collapsing, and she thought I was a tool she could use to fix it. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it filled the small apartment. "No," she repeated, her eyes widening in disbelief. "No," I said again, firmer this time. "There is no fixing this. What's done is done. The land is protected. That is the end of the story. You need to leave, Mother." The tears stopped instantly. Her face hardened, the mask of the victim falling away to reveal the familiar face of the disappointed, disapproving matriarch. "I see," she said, her voice turning to ice. "I see what kind of person you really are. You've chosen these old rocks and trees over your own blood. I hope you're happy." She stood up, pulled her dignity around her like a fur coat, and walked to the door. "Your father was right," she said without turning around. "You were always a disappointment." She slammed the door behind her. I stood there in the silence, my heart aching, but my resolve like steel. The last chain had been broken. A month passed. It was a month of silence from the Blackwoods and a flurry of activity for me, Sarah, and the Woodland Preservation Trust. We had been working behind the scenes, preparing for the final act. We knew the Blackwoods were financially hemorrhaging, their empire teetering on the brink of collapse under the weight of the bad loan. They were out of options, out of time, and out of fight. The moment had come to make our move. The meeting was set at Sarah's office. It was a cold, gray morning. I sat at the conference table, with Sarah on one side of me and Arthur Henderson on the other. Across from us sat my father and Ethan. The change in them was shocking. The swagger and arrogance were gone, replaced by a weary, hollowed-out exhaustion. My father looked 10 years older, his face etched with new lines of stress. Ethan stared at the table, his jaw clenched, refusing to meet my eyes. They were defeated men, and they knew it. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, and the meeting began. "Gentlemen," he said, his tone polite but firm, "we are here to discuss a potential resolution regarding the property known as the Miller Tract. As you know, your plans for the site are no longer viable. The Woodland Preservation Trust, however, is deeply interested in acquiring the land for the purpose of permanent conservation and the establishment of a public historical preserve." My father finally looked up, a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. "What are you offering?" he asked, his voice a hoarse croak. Mr. Henderson slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a formal offer. "The trust is prepared to offer you $250,000 for the property." The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. $250,000. For a property they had paid over $5 million for. It was a brutal, insulting offer. It was also their only lifeline. It was just enough for them to pay off a few of the tertiary costs and perhaps renegotiate the terms of their catastrophic loan with the bank, saving them from complete and utter bankruptcy. It was a pittance, a token, a crumb from the table of their former feast. Ethan let out a choked, incredulous laugh. That's an insult. It's an offer, Sarah corrected him coolly. It's a fair market price for a piece of land with such extensive and permanent development restrictions. Frankly, given the circumstances, it's a generous one. It's also the only one you are going to get. You have 24 hours to accept. My father stared at the paper, then at me. His eyes were a swirling mess of hatred, shame, and defeat. For a moment, I thought he was going to explode, to flip the table, to scream. But there was nothing left. The fight was gone. He just sagged in his chair, a broken man. He picked up a pen with a trembling hand and signed the document. He pushed it towards Ethan. Ethan looked at me, his eyes burning with a cold, pure hatred that I knew would never fade. He signed his name with a vicious slash of ink, then stood up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He walked out of the room without another word. My father followed, not looking at me, not looking at anyone, a ghost leaving the scene of his own demise. The door clicked shut behind them. It was over. 6 months later, on a crisp golden autumn afternoon, I stood at the newly erected entrance to the Miller Historical Preserve. The sign was beautifully carved from reclaimed wood. Below the name it read, "Protected in perpetuity by the Woodland Preservation Trust, in partnership with the community." The land was transformed. The old, overgrown wagon roads my grandfather had shown me were now clearly marked walking trails. We had cleared away the invasive undergrowth, allowing the native ferns and wildflowers to flourish. Small, discreet wooden signs marked points of historical interest. I was leading the preserve's very first public tour. It was a small group, just a dozen people, including a beaming Mr. Abernathy, who had retired from the archives and now volunteered here 3 days a week. I led them down the path, the leaves crunching under our feet, the air filled with the rich, loamy smell of the forest. I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was my purpose. This was my work. This was real. We stopped at the final marker, MH number 3, the one I had tripped over in my darkest hour. It had been cleaned and reset in a small clearing. A bronze plaque had been installed at its base, telling the story of the 3 soldiers it honored and the century-old covenant that had saved this land. A young girl on the tour, maybe 10 years old, looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. "So, the map was like a secret weapon?" she asked. I smiled. "Exactly," I said. It was a secret that was just waiting for someone to listen. As the tour ended and the visitors began to drift back towards the entrance, I stayed behind for a moment, my hand resting on the cool granite of the marker. I thought about my family. I hadn't spoken to them since the day they signed the papers. I had heard they managed to avoid bankruptcy, but Blackwood Development was a shadow of its former self, humbled and diminished. I didn't feel triumph, not anymore. I just felt a quiet sadness for what they had lost, not in money, but in spirit. They had a daughter who could read the stories hidden in the earth, and they had never once thought to ask her to read to them. I had spent so much of my life chasing their validation, trying to contort my passions into a shape they would recognize and approve of. But standing here, in this place I had saved, I realized the truth. Their approval was a cage I had finally broken free from. My value wasn't something they could bestow or withhold. It was here in the work of my hands, in the knowledge I had cultivated, in the history I had protected. My useless hobby had preserved a forest. It had honored the dead. And it had saved me. So this is my story. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the quietest passions have the loudest impact, and that being underestimated can be the greatest advantage of all. Your worth is not determined by those who refuse to see it. It is determined by the value you create and the principles you defend. If you've ever had a passion that others dismissed, or if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, I hope my story gives you a little bit of strength. Please share your own stories in the comments below. I truly believe we can all learn and draw inspiration from one another. And of course, if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more, so you don't miss our next journey together. Thank you so much for joining me today, and for listening. Remember that family is defined by love and respect, not just by blood, and that sometimes the most important history we can preserve is our own.